Arthur's name is now synonymous with artillery at Antietam. Not only did Jim Rosebrock literally write the book, but he has spent years through his guided hikes, his talks, his artillery demonstrations, and even his blogs, shining the spotlight on the importance of artillery in a way that really has challenged us to look at the battles of the Maryland campaign differently. He's going to do that again today by challenging the common narrative of who stopped the federal final attack at Antietam. Now, Lucas mentioned this too. You know that common narrative, you all know it. A.P. Hill's division arrives on the field and changes everything. It completely ignores Jones, as Lucas just talked about, and it doesn't say much about the Confederate artillery and the important role that it played on the southern part of the field in those last hours. But as we all know, Jim Rosebrock is not going to stand idly by and let that common narrative live. So he is here this afternoon to present his research, and there's some new stuff that has come out as he's been preparing this that is going to challenge us to think about that final attack differently. And between his talk and Lucas's and John's earlier, you know, they're preparing the battlefield for those of you who are going on the excursions this weekend. So we're going to see things differently. Jim Rosebrock is a retired combat Army veteran. He retired after 28 years, retired as a lieutenant colonel. He just recently retired from his second career with the Justice Department. And he holds a master's degree from the prestigious Industrial College of the Armed Forces. So please give Jim a warm welcome.
Laura, thanks for that very kind introduction. I'm going to start by reading a quote that really is embedded in the title of this weekend's program, and it's by Kai Douglas, if I'm saying Kai correctly. He says, at the critical moment, A.P. Hill was always at his strongest. Again, A.P. Hill at Manassas, Harpers Ferry, and elsewhere had struck with the right hand of Mars. The consensus by many is that it was A.P. Hill's light division smashing into the vulnerable left flank of Rodman's division, which stopped the 9th Corps in its tracks late on the afternoon of September 17th. Today, we will consider the role played by the massed Confederate batteries gathered by Robert E. Lee and his artillery lieutenants on the Harpers Ferry Road in stopping that final attack. So this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to try to evaluate the terrain's effects on artillery operations. And obviously, when you talk about artillery, you have to think about terrain, you have to think about elevation, you have to think about distances. We're going to explore why the 9th Corps only put 4 batteries on the west bank of the Antietam. You know, the Confederates managed to get, as Lucas said, 21 batteries over there. How come there's only 4 federal batteries on the east bank of Antietam Creek, or west bank, I'm sorry. We're going to assess the impact of field-grade officers on the artillery actions. And one of the things that's really come out in my research is the role of these artillery majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels on what happened at Antietam, not only at the final attack, but throughout the field. And finally, we'll demonstrate how Confederate command and control of artillery facilitated the successful response to the advance of the 9th Corps. So let's start by talking about terrain a little bit. So this is the area of operations that we're going to consider today. My map comes from Aaron Holly's excellent base map that just came out, which we have available for you today, that really takes a look at the battlefield in great detail. Now when you look at that map, the thing you don't want to confuse is elevation versus vegetation. A lot of maps you see, green implies lush forests or green vegetation, and brown implies like drier type of vegetation. On this map, green means low and brown means high. So elevation-wise, when you look at this map, obviously right along the creek you see the lower elevation, and we'll get another look at that in just a second. And then it'll rise and fall in a series of ravines as we move from the Burnside Bridge to the Harpers Ferry Road. So there's two crossings, actually three. You can't see the top one up there. But there is the Burnside Bridge, and there are the Snavely's Ford crossings, and then, depending on who you talk to in the guide service, some people call it the Old Ford, some people call it Dwayne's Ford, but there's another ford a little bit off the top of the map there. Now we have the artillery lines, the various artillery lines that the Confederates and the Federals used. From basically east to west, you'd have the Otto Farm Lane, which is going to be used by both the Federals and the Confederates. The next lane is what is now the Tour Road, but in those days it was just a fence line. That's the second line. And then we have what I call the Cemetery Hill 80 Farm Line, which is in the lower right corner of the map. And then finally, the Harpers Ferry Road. So this is the map we're going to use today to explore the movement of that Confederate artillery on the battlefield. So now let's look at it from another angle. Here you see the dotted white lines are low terrain, low elevations, okay? These are gullies and ravines, intermittent stream that rises up from Snavely's Ford is shown there, the low ground along the Burnside Bridge Road, and some of these north-south ravines that are appearing on the battlefield as well. So you have the Harpers Ferry Road, you have the intermittent stream that really runs through this part of the field, and then you have some north or some east-west ravines running here as well. Superimpose high points on the battlefield, you'll see that at the bridge, the elevation is 310 feet above sea level. And it's gradually going to rise from the bridge 415, 450, up to 515 feet above sea level, just west of the Harpers Ferry Road. That's 200 feet of elevation, okay? It's not just straight elevation up, but it's ups and downs. It's, I call it sort of a roller coaster kind of effect that the Union soldiers, the infantry that is trying to get up to the Harpers Ferry Road, have to cross here. Let's look at it from another perspective. Wintertime is the best time to take pictures of the battlefield because you don't have the foliage out there. So you see a couple of those ravines here. I'm looking east from the Browns Battery Stop 9, and you see a couple of these little ravines here that the Federals had to cross. Now, keep in mind that not only are there ravines to our east, but if you turn around and look to the west, there's a couple more of these things that the Federal infantry have to face as they move north. Contour lines. If you appreciate maps like I do, you have to understand contour lines. And the closer together the contour lines, the steeper the elevation. If you observe Carmen maps or Aaron's map that we have back here, look at contour lines. You get a real appreciation of what this ground looks like. Taking a photo doesn't do justice if you don't put a human being in there to show the elevation. So one of our interns in the back of the room here, Garrett, helped me out about a week ago, and he's standing there just showing the sheer elevation. And about on the 17th when we did the battle anniversary, Brian took us out there, and I didn't get a picture then, but I wanted one to show you what the elevation looks like. So as you study maps, if you study the Carmen maps or the Holly maps, we'll call them that, take a look at elevation and understand the importance of that. Part of this terrain thing is observation of fields of fire. You saw a couple pictures that Lucas had at his presentation. Look how open things are right after the battle. This is from the east side of the creek looking west, and what do you see? You see the Sherrick Farm Lane there, clearly. You can't see that now, can you? It's wide open. And so this artillery fire, whether it's Federal shooting at Confederates or the other way around, has very clear observations and fields of fire. So as you go from the Otto Farm Lane, you're going to start to approach this elevation. I call them steps. So the first step up the ladder is along the Otto Farm The next one, the next step up is Brown's Battery, stop 9. And then the next step up is on the Harpers Ferry Road, Peagram's Battery. So there's a series of these steps. And on each one of those steps, the Confederates are going to put artillery at some point during the day. So at Antietam, there were, by my calculation, is that better? By my calculation, there were about 305 Federal guns and about 248 Confederate guns. This thing is doing it to me. Okay, yet in the 9th Corps area, it's the Confederates that outnumber the Federals. Now this isn't an exact time comparison. They were at the same time. At the most, the Union batteries, there were 22 guns over there, about 4:20 in the afternoon. Later in the afternoon, the Confederates massed 64 guns on the Harpers Ferry Road and the area around that. So that's a significant number of guns. The other thing I want you to note, because we're going to really focus on this at the bottom in the orange, is those field grade officers. Those field grade officers will play a significant role in the command and control of the artillery on both sides. And obviously, the more of them you have, the more effective you can be. At least I think that's the case. Now, why does the 9th Corps only manage to get 4 batteries across the creek? We'll explore that next. A part of it is, let's look at the 9th Corps Artillery. The 9th Corps Artillery group, if you want to call it that, is bigger than the Federal Artillery Reserve. This is the largest group of guns in one organization at the battlefield. 10 batteries, 1,000 men, and 53 guns out there. Yet only 22 of those guns we're only able to get 22 of those guns across the field. And why is that? Let's talk about the commander of the 9th Corps Artillery, George Getty. George Getty is a West Pointer, class of 1840. He was breveted in Mexico, like so many of the other West Pointers that went over there. He was an artillery officer in the 4th U.S. Artillery, but he didn't command artillery in Mexico. He commanded Red Leg Infantry, which is an artillery unit that doesn't have guns. So he's going to distinguish himself more as an infantry role in Mexico. He'll become a battery commander in the early 1850s, see action in Florida. He'll see action in Kansas. And at the beginning of the Civil War, he is going to be appointed as a Lieutenant Colonel ADC, aide-de-camp. McClellan got around some of these restrictions on appointing officers in the artillery by making them aide-de-camps. So Getty is going to be one of those aide-de-camps, and he will be given command of one of the artillery brigades in the reserve artillery. In the 7 days battles, the artillery reserve had 100 guns. It was a much larger force than it's going to be at Antietam. Okay, why is that? And we won't spend a lot of time on that. Is when the 9th Corps rolled onto the peninsula in the July time frame. The orders from William Stanton and Washington were don't bring your guns, leave them in North Carolina. So what do we have to do? We got to give those our 9th Corps guys some artillery, right? Where does it come from? The Artillery Reserve. So the Artillery Reserve is downsizing. We don't need an extra lieutenant colonel out there, so Henry Hunt will give that artillery command of the 9th Corps to George Getty. So George Getty is the commander down here on the southern end of the battlefield. He's going to be able to get 4 batteries across. And these are the 4 battery commanders that you're going to meet today as we talk about this. And they're from left to right, they're kind of in order of arriving across the creek. First is Captain George Durrell. George Durrell is 46 years old. He had pre-war artillery experience in the Ringgold Battery, which is a Pennsylvania militia outfit. He is going to basically get command of Battery D at the beginning of the war. That is a rifled battery. Another thing about the 9th Corps compared to the other artillery in the other corps is it is predominantly rifled guns. If you look at the other corps, Second Corps, First Corps, etc., there is more of a number of Napoleon guns out there. So the Ninth Corps has a preponderance of rifled guns, which is sort of an interesting thing. So Sturgis's division is going to push its 2 batteries across. Remember, Sturgis's division is the guys that captured the bridge. So these guys managed to get across the bridge before things start to get clogged up, okay? The second battery is Joe Clark's battery. He's 36 years old. He's a career Army officer, West Pointer, class of 1848. He spent most of the 1850s, though, as an instructor at West Point or as a cartographer in the Coastal Survey. He doesn't really get back into action with the artillery until 1858, and then he's going to join Captain Getty in Battery E, 4th U.S. Artillery out in Nebraska, and later he will serve with John Gibbon in Utah. So Clark's got a lot of experience here leading artillery. The next guy is Captain Asa Cook. He's with Wilcox's division. Asa Cook is in some ways similar to George Durrell. Pre-war artillery experience in a militia unit. This particular one is the Boston Light Artillery. His battery only comes together in June of 1862, and it's for 6 months. You know, we hear about nine-month infantry regiments. This is very unusual to put an artillery unit together for only 6 months. Consider the amount of training you need, considering the amount of assembling of equipment and stuff. It's just an odd thing. I've not seen any other batteries that are in there for only 6 months. And then the last guy is Edward Muhlenberg. Charles Muhlenberg. There's 2 Muhlenbergs out here. I'll explain that in a minute. Charles Muhlenberg commands Battery A of the 5th U.S. Artillery. Now, at the beginning of the Civil War, the U.S. Army artillery establishment was 4 regiments, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. But right at the beginning of the war, when the government expanded the regulars, they added the 5th U.S. Artillery, and this was one of the batteries that was created. And actually, George Getty takes command of that battery, but as we know, George Getty's doing other things, so young Charles Muhlenberg will command it. It's the only Napoleon battery in the entire 9th Corps. Again, an interesting thing to my mind. His brother is, let's see, let me get this right here. His brother Edward commands Battery F of the 4th U.S. Artillery in the 12th Corps. So you have 2 brothers out here commanding artillery at Antietam. Okay, let's talk about why there's only 4 batteries on the other side of the creek. One is that the priority was getting infantry across, okay? A lot of people make something of the fact that it took so long for all of that infantry to get across the creek. Reality is that I think Cox and Burnside did a pretty good job getting that infantry across. They got it across in 2 hours. That's a whole division, plus some artillery, plus logistics, and they only used the bridge. They didn't cross splashing men across the Antietam Creek, to my knowledge. So in 2 hours to get the Wilcox's division ready to roll, along with Rodman, I don't think that's too bad of a thing. A guy named Henry Woodbury said, for several hours by reason of infantry having the right-of-way over the bridge, we weren't pushing artillery across. So infantry gets priority. The second thing is there's just traffic jams at that bridge. Infantry can move around those traffic jams pretty well, but not artillery. And if you look at the Carmen maps, the 3 o'clock and 4:20 map, you're going to see this battery here, Cook's battery, Asa Cook's battery, sitting along the road, not going anywhere. They're, for an hour or 2 hours, they don't go anywhere. So part of the reason there's not artillery across the creek is priorities and traffic jams, okay? The next thing may very well be ammunition shortages. The 9th Corps has 7 different kinds of guns. 7 different kinds of guns in the 9th Corps. Some of them are 20-pound Parrots, which are pretty heavy and not going to be easily moved, which are running low on ammunition anyway. But you have these James rifles. A James rifle is not a successful, let me say, successful type of artillery. And there are a couple batteries of James rifles. Some of them managed to get across, but Captain McMullen's battery, McMullen says, I didn't have any ammunition, so I couldn't move across. There's also some 12-pound howitzers, and then there's some boat howitzers. So I think the big problem, a problem, is that there's not enough ammunition for some of these batteries to get across. So the ones that get ammunition are going to be part of that. Others are not. And finally, I think it's as simple as a real estate issue. Space. How much space is over there to move those batteries across? Think about that. If you look at this map, this is the Confederate artillery at about early in the morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning. And what you see there is you see Eubanks Battery overlooking the creek. That's a potential artillery position. And you see Richardson and Eshelman's battery from the Washington Artillery on the Otto farmland. Okay? About the time that Getty gets all the guns across, they're taking up all that space too. Okay? The thing to remember about artillery is what? It's not just a straight line of guns. There's depth to it. There's the limbers and the caissons that go all the way back. If you stretch out a 6-gun battery, it takes out about the space of a football field. So imagine all of that real estate that is tied up for just those 4 batteries. So that may be a big reason. The Federals don't get any artillery past the Otto farmland. This is their staging area. This is their build-up area for this attack that the 9th Corps is going to launch. Scott Hartwig said, well, maybe they could have put a battery on the other side of the Burnside Bridge Road. If you all recognize this, I'm standing here for this picture about a week ago at Stop 9 where the Wise Artillery is, and I'm looking north, and you do see some open ground there, but the problem, I think, is that it's facing the wrong direction. Okay, the Burnside Bridge Road runs through there, the ground drops on either side. There's some ground here that might hold the artillery, and there's some ground here, but this is pretty rough ground. And what we don't see is that those guns on Cemetery Hill are right in front of them. So if you're trying to unlimber your guns in front of Cemetery Hill with all that Confederate artillery, that might not be a good deal. So maybe they could have put another battery there, I don't know, but I tend to think, in looking at the terrain, that probably wasn't something that they were going to be able to do successfully. Okay, let's talk about those majors and lieutenant colonels and colonels. Where do they come from? Where do they come from? In the U.S. Army, you don't have a lot of options, okay? The one is there's 5 regular Army artillery regiments, right? And they can give us about between 15 and 20, 21 field grade officers. All the colonels are in their 60s and 70s. They're really not the guys that you can put out on the field. And many of the lieutenant colonels and majors have already been promoted out or given volunteer commissions in the volunteers, so they're not available either. So there's really not a lot of regular Army artillery officers available to support the Army at Antietam. There's just one here, and that is Francis Clark, who commands the 2nd Corps Artillery. Another option might be the field grade officers in the New York Infantry Artillery Regiment, 1st New York, 1st Pennsylvania Artillery Regiment, 1st Rhode Island. But again, it's a matter of availability. There were no artillery officers from those commands at Antietam at this time. Now, they'll be here later on, and they're there before that. There's only one field grade officer in the volunteers here, and he's Major Arndt. He's in the 1st New York Artillery Battalion, German 20-pound battery, a 20-pound battalion. And so he's the only guy we're going to get from there. The only other artillery officers we're going to get is McClellan pulling a little sleight of hand. He got the authority to appoint ADCs, aide-de-camps. So he is going to appoint Henry Hunt as a colonel, William Hayes as a lieutenant colonel, and George Getty as a lieutenant colonel. So that's all the artillery officers that we have on the federal side. Just can't get them. Now the Confederates, I think, were a little more innovative. In January of 1862, they came up with a law that said we can assign or we can create additional artillery officers, okay? At the brigadier general level, you can have every 80 guns gets a 1-star general. I won't read them all, but you can see that that will allow the Confederates to have a significant number of artillery officers if they exercise this option, and they do. The other places you can get them in is in those state artillery regiments, just like on the federal side. There's a couple guys from the 1st Virginia Artillery Regiment that are here at Antietam, but all the rest of them are going to be made available based on this law of January 22nd, 1862. And let's see how that looks. So this is the field grade officers on the top that are in the United States Army. Just four field grade officers out here. And field grade officers do what? They command larger organizations, battalions, regiments, brigades sometimes. They have more authority to do things. And so they're not like company grade officers, lieutenants and captains. They have more authority to do things. Now if you add another overlay to this, you see how many of those were available in the final attack. So all of these guys are going to participate in the final attack. We'll be introducing those guys to you in a moment. Just Getty in the 9th Corps, and 5 of these guys from the lieutenant field grade officers on the Confederate side here. Let's meet Lee's artillery lieutenants. Not only the battalion commanders, but members of Lee's staff are going to be instrumental in getting guns to the right place at the right time. So Robert E. Lee, I'm not going to say anything about him. We all know him pretty well. But the next guy on the list is a guy named Colonel Armistead Long, right here. Long is a West Point trained artillery officer in the 2nd U.S. Artillery. And in fact, he served with Henry Hunt before the Civil War, and that Hunt was sort of a mentor to Armistead Long. Long will marry the daughter of Edwin Vose Sumner. So his father-in-law is Edwin Vose Sumner, and in fact, at the beginning of the war, he will be Sumner's aide-de-camp out in California before he comes east to Virginia, and at that point, he'll resign from the Army. Walter Taylor is an assistant adjutant general. He's 24 years old, VMI graduate. He's going to spend a lot of the day roaming those artillery camps in the rear area, scrounging up guns, looking for guns that can be brought to the front lines. And Robert Chilton, who was a paymaster, he was another one of Lee's staff officers that is going to help with moving guns around. So those are some staff guys that helped Lee. We also have 5 artillery battalion commanders here. James Walton is the first one. James Walton's 49 years old. He is Longstreet's chief of artillery. And he's responsible for the artillery defense from Cemetery Hill south. Walton's a little old in the tooth, though. He's 49 years old. Lee kills him with kindness by saying this. He says, while a brave, steady, and good officer in battle who maintained good discipline in his battalion, that sounds all right, Walton's knowledge of artillery, especially its science, was limited. His knowledge of ground, defective, and selection of positions, not good. And that's Walton. Walton's the one that fired up all the artillery ammunition on September 16th at Cemetery Hill. And so a lot of these batteries on the next day are scrounging rifled artillery ammunition because it's been shot up. Bushrod Froebel, I think, is one of the unsung heroes here at Antietam. He is Hood's chief of artillery. And if you know anything about where Hood was, where was he? Up in the cornfield. Froebel's battalion is positioned pretty much on Cemetery Hill, but earlier in the day, he's going to send a battery up into the Sunken Road. He's going to be moving his guns very, very effectively. We'll see him in action in just a few minutes. Froebel is a former officer in the U.S. Revenue Service. And I think you'll see after we're finished today and what you heard from Lucas that he and D.R. Jones make a very good pair, good working relationship. They're going to be working very closely together, wrangling up artillery to get it to the right place in the right time. Hood, at the end of the battle, commended Froebel for acting with great coolness and judgment. The next guy is S.D. Lee, who we know a lot about. If you go to the visitor center, those guns that are outside the visitor center belong to S.D. Lee. By 9 o'clock in the morning, his battalion is, quote, pretty well wrecked, okay, from all the action that it was taking in the Dunkerchurch Plateau. But by mid-afternoon, Lee has been able to reconstitute his battalion and get about 12 guns to Cemetery Hill. A significant accomplishment given shortages of artillery and all the other challenges the Confederates had. Lee did a great job in getting those guys together. The next guy is a guy named Alan Cutts, not so well known about, but Alan Cutts is one of Pendleton's reserve artillery battalion commanders. He was a one-time first sergeant in Braxton Bragg's artillery company in Mexico. The 35-year-old Georgian brought some of Bragg's snarling surliness to the Army of Northern Virginia, and he was a perennial thorn in the side of William Nelson Pendleton. Nevertheless, a capable commander moves elements of his battalion to the southern part of the field in the afternoon of September 17th as well. The next guy, the last one, is Colonel Reuben Walker. Reuben Walker commands A.P. Hill's artillery battalion. Reuben Walker's going to bring his guns up towards the end of the day. He's another VMI graduate. Reuben Walker is not as well known as Gregg and as Branch and as Archer, his infantry counterparts, but he plays a significant role here in the fighting and bringing his guns up. He had a good understanding of how terrain worked. He's going to pretty much focus his artillery not on going after the enemy artillery, but going after the enemy infantry. He's going to ignore some of that heavy artillery fire that's coming his way. So we understand now maybe a little bit about the difference in the two command structures of the Federal artillery and the Confederate artillery. Let's look at some maps. We're going to go back to Aaron Holly's map next and look at artillery at about noon, before the bridge is captured. And I have a little legend over here that helps you see how the artillery is laid out. Unlimbered guns are in a straight line, horizontal. Thank you, came to me. Horizontal line, and the black ones are rifled. The golden ones are Napoleons, and the white ones are old Mexican War 6-pounders or howitzers. Now you may not be able to see that from back here. Limbered guns are the guns that are hooked to horses, and they're shown on the map as well. They're more of a vertical line of guns as we show them on the battlefield. So before noon, this is what the artillery positions looked like. Squires and Bachman are on Cemetery Hill over here. Up here are two batteries from Washington Artillery, Eshelman and Richardson, on the Otto Farm Lane, which is going to get switched around in a couple hours when the Federals get there. And then further back, we have Garden's battery and Brown's battery. Garden belongs to Froebel, and Brown belongs to D.R. Jones. The only artillery battery in D.R. Jones's division, as Lucas mentioned earlier. Okay, so about noon, we see things start to happen here. Whiting's boat howitzers are going to appear approaching Snavely's Ford. These are small guns. They were part of Battery K of the 9th New York Infantry Regiment. So that infantry regiment not only had a complement of artillery or infantry companies, but had an artillery company of boat howitzers. They kind of scrounged around and created that battery themselves. Lee is going to see those guns moving across. That attests to what? Wide open terrain. You could see quite a bit of stuff there. And he is going to basically order Eshelman to move to overlook Snavely's Ford. So Eshelman's battery is going to move off the Otto Farm Lane to overlook Snavely's Ford and contest the action around Snavely's Ford as Rodman's division approaches that. Froebel and Jones, as testimony to the close working relationship they have, are on the high ground on the west side of the Rosebrock Bridge Road, and they're watching the infantry massing, the 9th Corps infantry massing on the other side of the creek. And Jones will tell Froebel, if we can hold on for an hour or two, A.P. Hill will be here, and then we'll be all right. If the artillery will aid me in holding this position until then. And essentially what Jones does is he gives Froebel carte blanche to move his artillery. Granted, he only had one battery, but he has responsibility and authority now to move that battery wherever it's going to be needed. So Froebel is going to move that battery up, Jones's battery up here, and this is how things look right about noon, or a little after noon. We have the battery moved to Snavely's Ford. We still have two batteries up there on the Otto Farm Lane, and so that's how things are going at about that hour. 1 o'clock, the Yankees are crossed, okay? They've crossed the Burnside Bridge, they've crossed at the Ford, the old Ford at the Wayne's Ford, and they've crossed at Snavely's Ford, and Toombs is starting to go back. So that will trigger another round of action by the Confederate artillery leadership. With the capture of the bridge, as Lucas said, Richardson's battery is going to get pulled back. It's going to reform, refit in Sharpsburg, and be back on the field in a couple hours. We're also going to see Brown's battery move from the stop 9 position you're familiar with on the tour map back to the AV farm line. And Froebel's also going to bring up a battery or a section of 24-pound howitzers to augment that defense there. So you're seeing what? Reaction to the crossing of the Burnside Bridge by the artillery leadership. And we're going to move Garden's battery, which had been in reserve, up to the high ground on the Cemetery Hill. Garden's got 4 smoothbore guns, but he's going to augment the defense on Cemetery Hill. So what are we seeing? We're moving artillery up here to respond to this situation. And that's about how it looks. We got Whiting on Limbert here, supporting the crossings of the Rodman's division over here. And we have the first of the Federal batteries crossing. That is Durrell's battery. George Durrell, this guy right here, is going to bring his guns up, and Joe Clark's going to bring his guns up as well. So now we have some artillery on the west bank. And I'll direct your attention to this little number up here that's going to keep changing. That is the number of guns on the west bank at that particular time. So there are 20 Confederate guns and 10 Federal guns. So we're now moving our artillery into what? That staging area that Burnside and Cox are establishing with the movement of Wilcox's division across the creek to these positions here. It has now become untenable, essentially, for Eshelman down near Snavely's Ford, and Eshelman will move back as well to a position on the other side of the Hagerstown Pike. So now 3 o'clock, we got our infantry across. We're getting ready to do what? We're getting ready to launch that attack. And what the Union soldiers said as they start to emerge and move forward is that we were in full view of the enemy lines on still higher ground about 1,000 yards beyond. This is the regimental historian from the 79th New York, okay? So as they start to move forward, they're going to start to see that Confederate defense there. About 3 o'clock, we have another Union battery crossing. That's Muhlenberg's battery. Come on, there you go. Napoleon's, our only Napoleon battery crossing. And we're going to get Asa Cook's battery moving. Now, Asa Cook's guys are going to get stuck on the road for about an hour and a half, okay? So it's going to take some time for those guys to get across and get into position to support the attack. So between 3 and 4 o'clock, you can see what? You can start to see the Union forces moving forward as they are getting ready to cross the line of departure. I'll call it that, the Otto Farm Lane. That's the line of departure. Once we get across that, we're going to be starting to encounter the enemy here. And now we're going to see Colonel Walton start to participate in the action down at the bridge, or at the Harpers Ferry Road. So Richardson's battery that had the pullback that was on the Otto Farm Line is back on the road. You see them showing up there. And you see Robert E. Lee getting involved. Lee is going to find another battery of the Washington Artillery, Miller's battery, which, if you know the Sunken Road story, was there earlier in the day, but they have replenished, and now a section of those guns, directed by Lee himself, are going to take position here as well. So now we have those guns here down at the lower part of the map, and Alan Cutts, the friend of William Nelson Pendleton I mentioned earlier, he is going to pull a couple Napoleons from his battalion. His guys are around the real farm, and they're going to bring it up. So you start to see what? The number of Confederate guns are increasing on the southern end of the line. Rodman's guns, part of Frobel's battalion, are out of gas. They're going to get pulled off of the high ground. That was the two Blakely rifles that he had. They're going to come off the line. Frobel's going to direct them back. And we're going to see Wilcox now getting involved with his artillery. Now, Wilcox, if you don't know it, was in the 4th U.S. Artillery as a regular Army officer before the war. So he's pretty good. He knows what he's doing when it comes to artillery. And he says that I brought with the division Cook's Battery, 8th Massachusetts, and left Benjamin's Battery, 2nd U.S. Artillery, which was 20-pound Parrots, doing good work in a commanding position across the river in our rear against enemy guns on the plateau and heights in front of us. In fact, Benjamin's Battery has some pretty long reach. They're going to be able to hit almost anything on the eastern side of the Hagerstown Pike, almost all the way up, maybe all the way up to the Dunker Church. Some of us have been out to his position a couple weeks ago, and some of you maybe as well. And he says, Wilcox says, I was now able to see and assist my division at every part of the ground, and coffin through solid shot, shell, and canister with great precision and effect. So Wilcox is hands-on with his artillery. He's only brought one battery across. His other one is going to stay across. That's Benjamin. But he will play an important role with his artillery in continuing to move it forward. But we also see what? Still stuck in traffic. Look at the Carmen. You look at the Carmen maps, those guns are still sitting there. For whatever reason, if it's traffic or priority, whatever, we're not getting any more artillery across. We're not getting any more artillery across. A guy from the 100 Pennsylvania now starts to talk about this Confederate artillery fire. He says, 2 noble batteries about 800 yards in front of us piled shot, shell, and grape and railroad iron at us thick and fast. There's a couple of references out here to railroad iron being fired at the Union guys. I don't know if they just, you know, I can't address that, but a number of guys will mention that. But this is a guy from 100 Pennsylvania that saw it. Note that Fairchild and Harlan now are behind the gun line. They're getting ready to move forward. They're getting ready to move forward. Another quote by a 9th New York guy about the Confederate artillery said, the practice of the rebel artillerymen was something wonderful in its accuracy. They dropped the shot and shell right into our line repeatedly. The round shot did not appear to be in a hurry. Came along slowly and deliberately, apparently, apparently, no harm in them until they hit something. That's probably true, isn't it? Okay, we're still in that 3 to 4 o'clock hour, and what we see now is the return of S.D. Lee. S.D. Lee has refitted 12 guns from his battalion that had been on the Dunker Church Plateau. Now, quite a few of them are going to stay on the northern side of the Boonesboro Pike, but what we're going to see on the southern side is Moody's Battery. Moody's Battery, Louisiana guys, the Tips, they called them, a rough outfit. Stevedores from New Orleans were a lot of the guys in this outfit, and Moody was pretty much of a tough hombre and taking care of them. But what you see now is that Lee has been able to reconstitute. Lee, a field grade officer, is moving parts of his battalion where? To the southern end of the line here to help support this threatening, imminent 9th Corps attack. The 9th Corps is on the move. You can see it here. You can see the various, I'm only showing brigade level organizations, so it kind of doesn't show you everything. But basically you got Christ and you got Christ and Welch, and Jim's going to show us that tomorrow moving forward down the Burnside Bridge Road. You have Fairchild moving forward, and you have part of the 8th Connecticut. You have the 8th Connecticut moving forward, but the rest of Harlan's Battery, for some reason, doesn't get the word. The 16th Connecticut, Fort Rhode Island are going to be back while the rest of those 9th Corps guys are moving forward here. This is a couple of quotes from the Union soldiers undergoing this heavy fire. A battery of field guns also commanded the road and hollow down to the river, and the whole plateau above was swept by crossfire. That's Wilcox talking. A murderous fire, that's Cook, the battery commander, talking. A most severe fire, that's Christ talking. And Colonel Cartwright of the 12th Ohio said, our loss occurred mainly from the enemy's artillery while engaged in holding in check the force endeavoring to turn on the left. So he's talking about the arrival soon of A.P. Hill's guys. So now I get to the idea of how long or how much does this artillery delay Wilcox? So I think that there's some delay. I don't know if I want to couch it as significant delay, but if you read some of the reports of these guys, Welch says that the Confederate artillery exposed for several hours to a tremendous crossfire from the artillery of the enemy. He says a couple hours, okay? Ewing says held under a trying fire from the enemy's batteries for some time. Joseph Gephardt of the 46th New York said, after having laid a while behind a rail fence, the accurate range of the enemy's batteries made the passage to the defile a matter of considerable difficulty. Okay. So we see quite a bit of artillery action going on against some of these guys, and some of them admit that it's delaying them or slowing them down. Remember, time is of the essence here. Sunset is 6:20. The guy that is under the gun is the 9th Corps to get to Sharpsburg. The guy that's trying to hold him back is Jones and eventually A.P. Hill. So those Confederates have to hang on until A.P. Hill gets here. So now we start to see A.P. Hill's infantry approaching. You see Gregg and Branch's outfit. Fairchild continues to move forward. More advances on the other side of the line. And from now on, I'll take the infantry off sometimes because it really clutters things up. So you can see just the artillery fully. So this is what it looks like about 4 to 4:20. And now we start to see the Cemetery Hill position collapse. The Confederates on Cemetery Hill are falling back. The infantry, but also the artillery are falling back. Moody, Squires, and Garden fall back out of ammunition and are pressed by advancing Federal regulars. Garden says the hum of the grape shop and spherical case sounded like swarms of mammoth bees. Okay. Garden wrote, literally the only direction from which shot did not come was from the earth beneath us. Okay, so it's gotten real hot. One of his guns is dismounted, and another is rendered useless. He loses one of his lieutenants, Lieutenant Pringle. And now we start to see Garnett's infantry falling back as well. Brown is pushed back. Brown is D.R. Jones's artillery regiment, or artillery battery. They're pushed back. William Palmer of the 1st Virginia and Kemper's Brigade said Brown battery was soon knocked to pieces by the Parrott guns across the Antietam. And now the A.P. Hill's artillery is coming on the field. So the first battery to come on is McIntosh's battery. And Sunday we're going to walk this Harpers Ferry artillery line as part of one of the last things we do this weekend with you guys. And you'll see some of these guns on that position there. So he is the first one to come across. Another guy that's going to appear, and this is one of those famous stories that everybody knows about. It is Lieutenant John Ramsey's Parrott guns. And Ramsey's finally found some rifled artillery ammunition. Okay, he's been scrounging all day. He comes back with 40 rounds of ammunition. He's going to encounter Robert E. Lee, and Robert E. Lee's going to ask him to shoot your telescope down there to the southwest. What's coming up that road, okay? And that's the famous conversation between Ramsey and General Lee. Ramsey says they're flying the Virginia and Confederate flags, and Lee replies with relief, it is A.P. Hill from Harpers Ferry. So he is going to then tell Ramsey, find Froebel, and Froebel will put you on the line. So you see more of this delegation of authority to Froebel, who's a very good artillery commander. And Lee himself rides up and places himself, quote, immediately behind the pieces, inspiring new energy from the tired gunners. Walter Taylor's looking for guns. He's a staff officer. He goes into Sharpsburg. He finds Saunders' battalion. That was R.H. Anderson's artillery battalion, smashed to pieces by the Federal guns of position. as they tried to take position earlier in the day in the Piper farm lane. He basically looks at him and says, "You don't got anything to help me here, brother. Back across the river for you." So we're going to pull Saunders' battalion out pretty quick. But it just, again, emphasizes what is going on with these staff officers as well as these commanders. It's 4:20 now. The final attack, if you want to call it that, has reached its high tide, and it's going to start to go back. You see Branch and Greg here driving in this direction. Archer's guys are moving up. And you see an attempt by the 8th Connecticut to capture the PD artillery, McIntosh's battery. Okay, so there's a big fight between the 8th Connecticut, and eventually McIntosh himself will pull his men back, but the battery isn't lost. The Toombs men, again, are going to counterattack and drive the 8th Connecticut back, and that's going to start this falling back of the Confederate positions, or the Union positions, I'm sorry. We now get some more artillery up on Cemetery Hill. Remember, we lost all those guns. They ran out of ammunition. They pulled back. So now we're getting some guns from 3 different outfits. S.D. Lee's battalion, Elliott's battery. We have Morin's battery from Saunders artillery. And we have Carter's battery from Pearson's battalion. Again, earlier Lucas mentioned this. All the different batteries, little bits and pieces from all over the field, coming up on the field. And now we're up to 39 guns on the Confederate side. And it's going to continue to get better for the Confederates, okay? We're going to see Braxton's battery, the 2nd battery of A.P. Hill's division, coming up the the Miller Sawmill Road and taking position. Willie Peagram's battery comes online. Peagram's battery is the one where the Harpers Ferry Road intersects with the Park Road, if you know where that is. And so now we got those guys up there as well. The number of guns continues to increase. 445, again, I just showed the infantry for a bit. You see Branch moving forward against the 8th Connecticut to a degree. The Harlan's guys over in the 40-acre cornfield are starting to get pushed back here. And we see a repositioning of some of Walker's guns from A.P. Hill's battalion. We're going to pull a couple of those guns from Pegram and Braxton's battery and set them up on the high ground so that they can do what? Enfilade the Confederate line, okay? And when we go to the winery, where we're going to be parking on Sunday morning, you can actually see where those guns were. And if the crops were not in the ground, we could walk up there and really see how they enfilade the 9th Corps line. 5 o'clock, we're going to get more artillery coming up, okay? And I'm going to move through this rather quickly. You're going to see the formation of a little artillery reserve around Lee's headquarters, okay? Cabell or McLaw's artillery battalion is going to contribute 2 guns from Reed's battery, and they're going to get set up around Lee's headquarters, kind of off the map a little bit. And they're going to be brought forward by one of Lee's staff officers there. You're also going to see a counterattack with Toombs starting to drive forward along Harpers Ferry Road, and Richardson's going to send a battery or a section of guns to help support that. And you're going to see Miller, who is one of Walton's artillery commanders, assemble an ad hoc artillery group. Little bits and pieces of a number of different units on the other side of the Harpers Ferry Road, and they are going to basically be coming into position there. Okay, let's see, 5 o'clock is where we're at. The last of A.P. Hill's battalions, batteries gets here. Crenshaw's battery arrives on the field now, taking up position in the location you see there. Reuben Walker, who's the battalion commander, continues to tell his men, ignore the Union artillery and concentrate on what? The Union infantry. So these guns are taking position along here and doing what they're supposed to do. We now start to see what? The Yankee batteries are pulling back, okay? Durrell's battery's pulling back, Clark's battery's pulling back. Clark really got pasted from the Confederate guns there. He lost to Lieutenant William Baker. Clark himself is seriously wounded, but the Confederates or the Union soldiers are now starting to pull back. They're starting to pull back their artillery as well. And by 5:30 in the afternoon, the Union 9th Corps is in retreat, pulling back towards the bridge. We'll assemble one final little ad hoc artillery outfit under a guy named William Squires. This is another battery commander in the Washington Artillery. So we mentioned Miller earlier. Miller created an ad hoc artillery group from bits and pieces of other artillery units, and Squires does as well. So Miller's going to be in this area here, and Squires is going to set up here. And he's going to start to see some additional artillery coming from Harpers Ferry. Remember, when Jackson captures Harpers Ferry 2 days ago, he got 42 guns. And so some of Jackson's artillery remained in Harpers Ferry to get refitted, and now they are starting to show up on the field, almost too late to be of any use, but nevertheless they're going to be out there. That's Latimer's battery, and it is Dement's battery. Two batteries from Lawton's division are going to come up. They're going to come under the overall command of Squires over here, and also coming up is a couple guns from Chew's battery. Chew's got the Stuart Horse artillery, and they were down by the ironworks for much of the day, and they're back on the wheel as well. All right, I want to conclude now. Hopefully what I've kind of described can be summarized here briefly. As the guns fell silent on that long September day, there you go. That's supposed to be nighttime, okay? As the guns fell silent on that long September day, replaced by the screams of the wounded and dying, the 9th Corps final attack, begun just 4 hours earlier, had, with such great promise and potential, was backward started. Certainly, as Kai Douglas recalled, A.P. Hill indeed struck with the right hand of Mars, but to simply subscribe to the idea that Hill alone was responsible for the repulse of the 9th Corps ignores the contributions of Toombs, D.R. Jones, other brigade commanders, and more importantly, the role of Robert E. Lee, his staff, and a handful of artillery battalion commanders who, A, selected the right terrain, B, put the guns in place, C, inflicted heavy casualties on the Federal infantry, D, slowed the inexorable advance of Christ, Welsh, and Fairchild toward Sharpsburg, and gave enough time for A.P. Hill to get into position. But we do have to acknowledge what? The Federal artillery as well. The role of the Federal artillery on both sides of the Antietam has to be acknowledged. On the West Bank, outnumbered at times by a factor of 3 to 1, the cannoneers gamely stood by their pieces, supporting the infantry attack and punishing their adversaries to the point of driving a number of Confederate brigades off. I'm wrapping up. I got 1 more minute. Private J.L. Napier of the PD Artillery later declared to Captain McIntosh, his battery commander, "I always thought we were of more service to General Lee's army at this battle than at any other during the war. I believe the stand we made saved the army." And A.P. Hill simply wrote of his artillerymen, "You saved the day at Sharpsburg." Thank you.